typical request response cycle in done. The request is made and we wait for the response, and then based on the response, we then update the UI. So as an example here, I'm in a done task. If I were to add a comment and then I were to submit it here, the request is sent to the API. We get that little bit of a loading loop as we're waiting for the response. The response comes back and then we act upon the response. In this case, we add that comment to the history. Now, there are certain scenarios where I do things a little bit differently. So let me take you to the dashboard here. So there's a couple scenarios where I don't wait for the response to come back. And this is an approach I call the optimistic response handling approach. And it's really good, I think, for certain scenarios. So for instance, in this case, if I were to click on the close button here, you'll see that pretty instantaneously that task is removed from the pin board. Similarly, if I'm down here and I add a mailbox as a favorite, so let's move this core box as a favorite. If I click it, you'll see it pretty instantaneously. It goes up to the top. If I click it again to remove it, it instantaneously goes to the bottom. Now, in both those cases, with the pin board removal and with the favorites, toggling the favorite, there's an API call going on. So here is the dashboard pinboard call to remove a pinned item. So that happens when you click the close button. Instead of what I would traditionally do, which is you would await this call, so the actual backend call to delete the pinned item, await that response to come back and then update the UI. I essentially do an optimistic handling of it. I assume that this call is going to work, and by work I mean it simply is going to remove it from this user's pinned items and however we're storing it in the backend. And so I assume that, and so when that close button is clicked, instead of calling the API call first, I simply update the pinned items. That's the items that are shown in the pin board. In this case, it was just one, and I filter out the particular one that I clicked, so the one with this ID, so that you're left with whatever is remaining. And then after that, I do the call. The net effect of it is on the UI, you instantly see that card go away, even though the call is being made right after that. Now, what happens if there is an error? Well, I typically would not expect an error in this case because it's a pretty simple call. There's not a lot happening. There's not a lot of things other than the database being down or the API or the connection being down that would happen. But in the event that it does happen, I emit the error, and basically this is just a way of showing, this is what I call to then expose what the error is to the user. And then here I'll just call get pinned item. So this is going to go basically fetch the pinned items directly from the database, and then we expose those items to the pin board, just as a way to make sure that we're synced up with whatever is in the database at that point. And then in the case of the favorites for mailboxes or projects here, you'll say here's the method. It's called toggle favorite, and kind of in the same vein here, all I'm doing is I'm setting the isFavorite boolean, which controls the whether or not that particular mailbox or project is a favorite. I just toggle it, so I make it whatever the opposite of it was, and then I'll set this favorite, set this as a favorite in the database. So this set favorite call underneath is an API call, and again, we're not waiting for the response here. If there is a response here, we'll catch it, we'll display the error, and actually probably what I should do here, I could either, set this item back to the original status of isFavorite, or just maybe fetch those mailboxes or projects again, just to, again, sync up what's on the UI with what's in the database. Now, why or when do I choose to do this kind of optimistic approach? For me, there's a couple of factors. One of them is, what would the user expect? So when I'm here doing when I'm doing a comment update here, or if I were to add a new task, I could also take that same approach. I could have a title and choose the assignee, write a description, create task, and optimistically assume it's all going to save. And I already have the data sort of here on the front end, so I could use that data to create the task detail. But most users aren't probably expecting that. They're expecting there to be some sort of wait time. They're expecting to see some sort of loading UI. It's kind of a bulkier, bigger action they took. And so in most cases, quite honestly, I would just do the traditional approach of let's wait for the response to come back. Based on the response, then update the UI with whatever data I need. I may need to call another GET request to get some other data, whatever it is. But in scenarios like this, and in this case I'm showing you two with the dashboard and with the favoriting, these are really simple calls that really just have a one-way scenario. You're removing something from the pin board, you're toggling whether or not a mailbox or project is a favorited item. There's only one successful response that could happen, and the UI update for that is pretty simple. So I prefer in these cases to assume that the response will be successful, update the UI with that assumption. And in the rare case where something goes wrong, we can omit the error, we can sort of roll back or recall the data to make sure things are in sync again. What I often see a lot in SPA applications is not doing it the optimistic way, but the calls are generally fast enough where you don't want to spend time putting a loading loop on. It'd be kind of clunky if we clicked this button here and then actually made a call back and there's a little loading thing for that little interim. And so I see a lot of SPA apps where you just sort of just click on it and nothing happens for maybe 500 milliseconds, maybe even a full second, and then the UI gets updated because they're not doing an optimistic response. They're waiting for the callback, knowing that it probably is going to be pretty fast. But again, you never know based on a user's connection or based on the state of the database at that time. And you end up getting this sort of really stagnant and kind of confusing experience where you're doing an action and it maybe takes a little bit of time for something to resolve itself. In these small cases where I can just toggle and sort of have things happen instantaneously, optimistically, assuming the responses are successful, it just feels a lot better. It feels a lot cleaner. It feels a lot more reactive. And so I would suggest you pick your spots, but find places where it makes sense to do these optimistic response handling approaches. So that's my tip for today, and I hope you enjoyed it.